رحمة للعالمين ومنارا للسالكين وحجة على العباد أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين اللهم صل. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has revealed the Quran to be a blessing for everyone and a beacon for those who are walking on the path of the righteousness, and a proof for all. We convey our greeting and salutation with the Holy Prophet of Islam and his pure progenies. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another Tafsir session in which we will be dealing with the second part of Surah al-Inshiqaq. I pray that you are all well, inshallah, and safe. We talked about Surah al-Inshiqaq briefly and stated a little bit about its structure and the place of revelation being in Mecca. And I mentioned that the surah can be divided into two parts. First part was something that we dealt with last week. It was, and during that the first part points to the events that lead to the end of time, the end of world, what in the academic language is called the eschatological discussion leading to the Day of Judgment, how the world is going to come to an end in preparation for the Day of Judgment. This concept or theme is a recurring theme during the latter part of the Quran, particularly number of surahs that we have already covered, few of them, and we will be covering, inshallah, by the help of Allah in the future, few others that talks. And in some of these surahs, the end of time is presented in a graphic manner where we have to pay attention to. The account of those in the second part, I said that the account of those who are guided and misguided are given, and some of the deeds that ultimately leads are listed, not exhaustively, but at least just briefly. Some of the deeds are listed and their consequences are stated. We start, we also covered, during the first part, we addressed the symbolic distinction between the left hand and the right hand, and their consequences when it comes to receiving the book of deeds. This is again another recurring theme in the Quran, and as a consequence of the way people receive the book of deeds, broadly speaking, in the first part of Surah al-Inshiqaq, people are divided into two groups, and successful, those who receive their book of deeds on the right, and failed are those that receive it either from the back or receiving it in the left hand side. And I mentioned that there is a verse in the Holy Quran that on the Day of Judgment, those who disobeyed, their faces are turned backward. So this is again another graphic representation of those who are cursed and doomed. On the the passage number 9 in the Quran, in Surah al-Inshiqaq, وَيَنْقَلِبُ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا. These two groups, the ones that have been dealt with and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been forgiving, their deeds have been positive, they would return to their ahl, which means to their family, extremely happy and content. that particular surah, that particular verse or passage led or generated a question after the tafsir regarding the question posed was, we have relationship in this world, parental relationship, sibling relationship, husband and wife relationship, etc., etc. Are these relationships going to survive this transition during Alam al-Barzakh until ultimately we get to the end of time, on the Day of Judgment? If we look at the entire literature that we have, both from Quran and from the Ahadith, we have to state something here before we proceed. That Alam al-Barzakh or Qiyamah, it's very difficult to envisage or think about it, have a clear picture. So what we have as far as information or the picture, no matter how small or how little that we have about Alam al-Barzakh or Qiyamah, is coming out of various verses in the Holy Quran and a few ahadith that we have. As far as those that we talked about them during the spiritual discussion or spirituality or Arfan, they are privileged enough to achieve death before death, where they have a clear vision of the world here and the hereafter. We only have anecdotal reports or stories being told by these masters, which conform with some of the ahadith that we have, as well as the verses that we have. So if we look at the ahadith and verses, starting with let me read the chapter first, and then we move forward. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فلا أقسم بالشفق والليل وما وسق والقمر إذا اتسق لتركبن طبقا عن طبق فما لهم لا يؤمنون وإذا قرئ عليهم القرآن لا يسجدون بل الذين كفروا يكذبون والله أعلم بما يوعون فبشرهم بعذاب أليم إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم أجر غير ممنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. I swear by the glow of the sunset and the night and the objects it envelops, and the moon when it grows full, that you shall certainly ascend gradually, or you move from phase to another phase. We talk about it later. So what has come over them, that they do not profess faith? When Quran is recited, they do not prostrate or they do not feel humble. The disbelievers are denying, and God knows fully well what they have done. Give them the glad tidings of a painful torment, but for them, for those who accepted faith and did righteous deed, there is indeed eternal reward. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyah. So, if we go back to the verse that we to the passage that we talked about, وَيَنْقَلَبُ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا, and look at this relationship between humans here and the hereafter. There is a verse in the Holy Quran that talks about two categories of relationship in this world. One, nasabi and sababi. That means there is a relationship that comes out of nasab, which is a genetical relationship, parents, children, etc., etc. And there is also a sababi relationship that you create the reason for it, which normally comes from marriage. So all of these relationships the question that was posed, whether on the Day of Judgment these relationships continue, and whether we would recognize our loved one or our friends and so on, and whether there would be an acquaintance relationship between us and continue this relationship. If we look at few of the verses in the Holy Quran, clearly states that these relationships continue in a sense that the souls recognize each other, recognize their friends, recognize their families on the Day of Judgment. Surah Abbas 34 to 37, where it describes the enormity of the Day of Judgment, to the point, يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ شَأْنٌ يُغْنِيهِ. The enormity of the day is such that one runs away from one's brothers, mother, father, partners, and children, implying recognition. If you don't recognize your brothers and sisters on the Day of Judgment, how you can run away? Because لِكُلِّ امْرَئٍ مِّنْهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ شَأْنٌ يُغْنِيهِ. Everyone is paying attention to his or her own affairs. You really care less about what happens to other people. So the fact that in this verse, Surah Abbas, actually mentions that there is a recognition and then distancing, so people actually recognize each other as family members or friends. In Surah Safat, number 50, فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ قَالَ قَائِلٌ مِّنْهُمْ إِنِّي كَانَ لِي قَرِينٌ. For those who go to heaven, they visit each other, and they ask about former acquaintances that they had. And they say, well, in the worldly life, I used to have friends, such a friend, that I don't see them around. So by implication, this indicates that then they will turn to each other asking questions from one another, saying that I had a companion in the worldly life. So they do recognize. There are two verses in the Holy Quran that frames this relationship in a general way and creates some kind of a paradigm for who meets who on the Day of Judgment. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ بِإِيمَانٍ أَلْحَقْنَا بِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ. Those who believe and their family followed them in their belief, we will join them together. So if fathers or parents have of a belief and they worked hard and the children follow that belief, then on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring the two families together. وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ. In this world, they followed suit. They would be joined together if their faith are similar, their values are similar. In Surah Ra'd, جَنَّاتُ عَدْنٍ يَدْخُلُونَهَا وَمَنْ صَلَحَ مِنْ آبَائِهِمْ وَأَزْوَاجِهِمْ وَذُرِّيَّتِهِمْ. When this verse, Ra'd number 23, talks that again, those who have been faithful, did righteously on the Day of Judgment, they are going to go into heaven, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would allow the good or the righteous individuals from their parents and from their partners and from dhurriya, which means their descendant and their children. Which means these two verses at least they are trying to create, and that the paradigm is that as long as there is a harmony between the deeds of the parents, the faith of the parents, and the faith of the children, or some kind of unity between the two, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the families together on the Day of Judgment. There remain one verse in the Holy Quran that has become questionable. I mean, people have used it to state that all relationships are going to come to an end based on that verse. And that is Surah Mu'minun 101. فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ فَلَا أَنْسَابَ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَلَا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. Once the trumpet is sounded, there is no ties of kinship. No ties would remain, and no inquiries. Here, because of this verse, and in the light of the existence of other verses or other passages in the Holy Quran, commentators have been moved to explain the meaning of la ansab, not to mean that there is no recognition or no acquaintances or no formal relationship. The usefulness of these relationships are going to be rejected on the Day of Judgment. Quran in this verse is not trying to say that there is no relationship. Quran is not going to say that there is no recognition or acquaintances. These are facts, and we have a number of ahadith clearly stating this. But what is the Quran is trying to state in this verse, that none of these relationships or recognition or acquaintances or friendship are going to be useful. Because Day of Judgment is the day of action. There's another Surah Saba that somehow underscores this. فَالْيَوْمْ لَا يَمْلِكُ بَعْضُكُمْ لِبَعْضٍ نَفْعًا وَلَا ضَرًّا. On this Day of Judgment, there is no benefit or no harm that comes from one to another. Everyone is loaded with their book of deeds, and that is what frames how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to deal with them, and how they are going to ultimately, whether they're going to be on the left or on the right, according to the discussion that we had last week. There is a hadith that again underscored this concept, al-yawm amalun wa la hisab. Today, this world, you are free to do whatever you want, and nobody is going to question you. وَغَدًا, tomorrow, is hisabun wa la amal. Once the book of deed is shut, by the transition from this life into alam al-barzakh, one's only hope is what we have sent forward as an investment, and the time that we have invested in this world in bringing up children or khalaf al-salih or anybody else, that they will be the source of sustenance for us during alam al-barzakh. Because there is another hadith that says people are searching for longevity, and there are only three sources for longevity. Number one, you open a public or social public project that people benefit from it, and as long as, say, build a school, build a hospital, build a water project or something else, that people benefit from this, or a clinic, as long as people benefit from it, from this project, the thawab and the reward that comes out of it will be given to the person that was instrumental in bringing, or pivotal in bringing the whole thing. There's a story about Bahlul, a character, an eccentric character during, well, he was extremely sharp, but pretended to be eccentric, so he could speak his mind, and people would not be punished by Harun Rashid because he was extremely vocal in criticism. One day he was passing by and saw a mosque at night with a big kind of tablet or stone outside, says that this is the mosque that Hajj Fulan has built. So he removed the tablet and he put on it instead, this is a mosque that Bahlul built. Stuck it up there. Tomorrow morning, Hajj Fulan came to the mosque, says, who's done that? Brought Bahlul in. He said, did you do it? Yes, I did. Why did you do that? He said, why should it matter? If you did it for the sake of Allah, the reward is already under your name, whether your name is there or it isn't. my name is there, is not going to give me any reward. This way reminded the Hajj or the wealthy of what he has built. You are doing it riyah, ostentation, to show off. And as long as you do this, it's not going to be worthwhile. So one is to build major project that's socially useful. Two, train students or write books and so on that people, I still, when I go to some of the books of my old professors, as soon as I open them, I recite Surah al-Fatiha for my professors that unfortunately departed. The third one is to bring up children that they become khalafus salih and they remember you. This leads to the question that one day, inshallah, we will be discussing. Khalafus salih, that they will remember you. They become the source of all the benefit that you can get. Because during Alam al-Barzakh, we really cannot change our life. We are literally stuck with a book of deed that we have committed or not committed, whatever it is. It is these three sources that ultimately can come to our help. And if you imagine the balance, tip it in one direction or the other. This is why, with regard to the arwah or the souls, they come and visit houses and places where they were familiar with and look at their friends, particularly children, to see where they remember them. Laylatul Jum'ah has been mentioned, and other during ziyarat, they remember them and recite Fatiha, Shahr Ramadan, etc., etc. This is the time where the benefit goes to them. So these two passages that says it frames a totally different concept. It doesn't want to talk about whether on the day of judgment you're going to recognize, I'm going to recognize my father or my mother or my grandfather or anybody else. It's not within that context. It simply is trying to state that the day of judgment is a day in which you have to deal with book of deeds, no more, no less. Acquaintances are not going to be helped. There are few hadith as well in this, with this regard, that underscores this point from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. أرواح المؤمنين يلتقون ويتساءلون ويتعارفون. The believers, the souls of the believers on the day of judgment, they're going to meet each other and exchange pleasantries and ask about each other, how has been your journey, etc., etc. There is another hadith that says, أرواح المؤمنين في حجرات الجنة. They are in quarters in heaven, and they eat, and they drink, and يتزاورون. They actually go from place to place to see friends and acquaintances that have come to exist in there. So there is only another hadith from the Holy Prophet which I want to talk about this. Although some scholars debate whether the Holy Prophet has said this, the sanad and so on, كل حسب ونسب ينقطع في يوم القيامة إلا حسبي ونسبي. Every relationship, hasab and nasab, descendant or direct or indirect, they are going to terminate apart from my relationship. Again, in the light of the two verses that we talked about, clearly underscores this, that if you are looking on the day of judgment for a relationship that comes to your assistant, nobody else from your family would come apart from Ahlul Bayt. So focus in this world in strengthening your relationship with Ahlul Bayt, because on the day of judgment, your action will be the one that ultimately guides your path to one way or the other, heaven or hell. But stronger and consolidated relationship with Ahlul Bayt as the only thing that would survive on the day of judgment, in addition to your deed, will be useful and helpful. This is why Ahlul Bayt never encourage their followers, the believers, not to focus on their deed. As we talked about 2 nights ago, the hadith from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir regarding the true Iman and the followers of Ahlul Bayt is first to submit to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, the relationship, the friendship, the fact that they are going to exchange pleasantries, and by the way, that criteria that was established, or the frame or the paradigm for meeting, applies to both sides, good and bad. If you are good and the family comes with you, you will meet each other on the day of judgment. And if you are bad, you will meet your families and acquaintances and friends that happen to be with you, because ultimately it's that union and the harmony between action that frames the relationship. So if there is harmony, bad or good, you're going to meet these people. That's why we need to stay away from people that are corrupting. So now let's go back to today's verses and finish the chapter, inshallah. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالشَّفَقِ. We have talked about this in a number of chapters where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either from the beginning or in the middle, begins to develop an idea through oath that swears by a number of things. This surah was somewhat unique because at the beginning of it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts with oath to establish some proposition and premise, and then in the middle of the surah starts again with the 3 oaths, and then to underline a different proposition or somewhat related to each other. If you remember at the beginning, it's a form of oath. إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انشَقَّتْ وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ وَإِذَا الْأَرْضُ مُدَّتْ وَأَلْقَتْ مَا فِيهَا وَتَخَلَّتْ وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ. The first proposition was يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانِ إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَى رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. You kick and struggle. It's not going to change anything. You will be dragged towards meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ultimately you're going to meet. That was the first proposition. In the middle, فَلَا أُقْسَمُ بِالشَّفَقِ, again starts with the second sets of oath. I'm not going to swear. I swear, it says it's a unique genre in Arabic language or grammar, but it used the negative to underline the positive, to mean positive. فَلَا أُقْسَمُ, technically, if you look at the literal word, it says I'm not going to swear, but technically means I swear. فَلَا أُقْسَمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. We similar verses that we have covered or later on we're going. It's a unique genre in Arabic literature. So here it says, I swear by the glow of the sunset and the night as it envelops everything, and by the moon when it grows full. These are the 3 oaths. Then comes the second proposition. لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. This is again somehow related to the first proposition. The first proposition said that no matter how hard you try to stay away, you are being dragged towards Allah and you're going to meet it. In this proposition, it talks about the stages that we go through in our life. Tabaq, or phases that we have to go through in our life. That you are going through phases. Here, you shall certainly pass through phases. And commentators have talked about, given various opinions regarding to what these phases are. Some have talked about general human existence and experiences. We go through ease after difficulty, or difficulty after ease. We go through poverty after richness, or richness after poverty. We go through health after sickness, or sickness after health, etc., etc. So these are various phases. Or some people understand it in reference to many states of being. Brother Ali, we talked about this in the past, the creation from ex nihilo, from nothing. You were nothing, and from Adam, you were brought into existence. And from death comes, and dying. You go through barzakh, and then resurrected again. You die, and then resurrected again. So these are stages, many stages in life. Other people have talked about various other things, spiritual. You begin with, or physical, even physical human being that Quran talks about. Three major phases of dependence, independence, and dependence again. The three phases of human life. The early part of dependence, depending on parents when we are born and children. Then we become independent to a degree. And this is the critical time that we have to be very careful. When we become independent and we feel needless, we don't think about our parents, we don't think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we get a corrupt society here that we see because it feels needless. We have the wealth, we have the power. Why should I care about God or the hereafter? So various opinions are given. Then Quran moves into a critical question. Again, we talked about this some times ago. Seeing all of these, whether the celestial or the signs that exist around, signs that exist in ourselves. I was reading a book a few months ago regarding the delicate nature of human composition. And this expert was talking about for your brain to give an order, for you to move one finger, over 25,000 elements have to work together, from nerves to signals to muscles and everything else. If that is correct, it's a world that we really don't understand anything. And yet, the moment my mind decides move, my finger moves. And we talk about the speed of light. Look at your eyes. How many muscles have to work together for you to see? Look at movement, human movement. How many nerves, muscles, and so on. Slight change in one of the balance and one is stuck. So Quran here poses a question. After all this, seeing all the signs and everything that is around them, all the phases that they go through, all the phases of the existence, and how everything ultimately returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how could human? There is another verse in the Holy Quran, Ya ayyuhal insan ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Why are you so arrogant that you don't see your position? This is another way of presenting it. That with seeing all the signs and everything that is happening again around you, you still are not prepared to accept fact of life, that you will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and on the day of judgment you will be called. فَمَا لَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And then وَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ. Again, focus is prime, because this verse is a Makki surah. I don't believe in the Makki surahs there were anything to do with sujda or anything else, but I stand to be corrected. But it just simply talks about khushu', and sujood here simply is in reference to khushu', humbleness and humility. It should. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi, in a short hadith around the end of Nahj al-Balagha, he says, I'm baffled by how arrogant humans behave, but when you think about their beginning, their end, and in the middle, they really have no legs to stand on. Their beginning is, as Amir al-Mu'mineen says, a stinking sperm. Their end is going to be a jifa, which is a stinking meat, flesh, and in between they carry nothing but bad things. Who are you to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There is another thing that says, little bit of sweat makes you stink. And then you stand before Allah. You become arrogant. So these are part of the same thing. وَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنِ Some people are incurably ignorant. No matter what you present to them, they are not going to accept. Quran comes, Mu'jiza comes, and everything, yet, no, these are sorcery, magic, and so on. And we are not going to accept. So this is the sujda in this surah is in reference to khushu', humbleness. As the verse in Surah Isra 109 says, وَيَخِرُّونَ لِلْأَذْقَانِ يَبْكُونَ وَيَزِيدُهُمْ خُشُوعًا. When the name of Allah, the glory of Allah is being mentioned, it overpowers them and they submit in absolute humility and submission. بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ Those who are disbelievers, they deny everything and they claim that everything is fabricated. They are not prepared. Why? Because they don't want to accept. Imam Hussein salawatullah salam alayhi in Ziyarat Arafah has a statement. He says, when did you disappear from the eyes of the heart that we need to prove you by proof? You always have been around. If there is a blind spot, it's from us. We are the one that don't see things because of the veil. So, بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا The disbelievers reject everything. And they claim that it has been fabricated. And God knows full well that they are accumulating. Now, this is again in reference to the Book of Deeds. Accumulating everything for the day of judgment that they have and they have to face on the day of judgment and see what they have accumulated, either positive or negative. بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا يُوعُونَ Accumulate. Whatever you put together, hoard, another word for it, a synonym. فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ Again, another unique genre in Arabic language. For people who are arrogant, you bring the curse, but you put it into good tidings. It says, give them good tidings that they are going to be cursed and punished on the day of judgment. Because there is nothing else you can do for them. فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ Then, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ This is something similar to Surah Teen that we have covered in the past. End of Surah Teen, it was almost the same. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ There was a far difference between the two endings. So again, if you look at the whole surah, we start with an oath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds humanity that you are going to be dragged towards Allah, and on the day of judgment, what matters is your deed, book of deed, and you will be questioned according to that. That book of deed would designate you where to be positioned, either right or left. And then again, the chapter ends with similar kind of language or narrative, that on the day of judgment, the disbelievers are going to be given the good tidings of the punishment, apart from those who believe and do good deeds. That brings the whole chapter together. Let's see if there are any questions, and then we move forward, inshallah.